Some will say, oh, well, it's Christianity. Christianity is the dominant way of thinking today. Some will say, oh, well, it's atheism. Atheism is the dominant way of thinking, the dominant ideology of today. Some will say Zionism. Zionists control the entire globe, and that's the dominant power of today. But this is all incorrect. The dominant way of thinking, the dominant ideology, the dominant way of life is called modernism. Modernism is something that emerged out of what's called the Protestant Reformation in Europe in the 16th century. This is 16th century to present. This is called the modern period. And because of certain factors, certain philosophy, certain thinkers from that time, they developed an ideology that has been called modernism. And what the Europeans decided at that time, their philosophers, their politicians, their thinkers, is that we don't need religion to tell us how to live. We don't need the Bible. We don't need the church. In fact, when we follow the Bible and the church, that leads to war and violence and conflict. The religious influence is something that is detrimental to humanity. We are enlightened. We have to use science. We have to use reason to understand how to live our lives, how to organize our societies, how to raise our children. Science and reason will guide us to the truth, not these books, not these old traditions. These religious traditions, church traditions, cultural traditions, these are holding humanity back. These are like chains. We have to cut the chains in order to advance and progress. So the critics of these modernists, the critics said, well, how can you know your mind is limited, the human mind is limited? How can you know what is the best for humanity, what is the best for society, what is the best for how to raise your children? How can you know? You don't have the all knowledge in order to determine the best path. And the modernist answer to this was that, well, we change and we update. If we will try something and if we get it wrong, then we'll change again. If we get it wrong, then we'll change again. We'll continue to update. We'll continue to progress. This is progress. This is another ism, progressivism. Humanity has to progress, and we can learn new things through science. We can learn new moral truths. We can learn new sociological truths. And this is how humanity advances, step by step by step. We always have to progress and change and update and adapt. And if you don't change and progress and adapt, then you'll fall behind. You'll fall behind and you will be considered on the wrong side of history. Have you heard this expression, being on the wrong side of history? So this is the Western understanding of human history. Human beings today, people today, are the best and the brightest. Human beings today are the most rational. They're the most moral. If you look at people today, they understand, the enlightened Westerner understands that gay marriage is a beautiful thing. The modern Westerner understands that people need to be free to experiment with different types of relationships and behavior. The modern person today recognizes that slavery is a barbaric evil of the past. The modern person today recognizes that there's not just two genders, there are many genders. These are things that the modern person understands, but past people, they didn't understand this. Even 5 years ago, people did not accept many of these things that we now know. 10 years ago, they were even worse. 20 years ago, even worse. 50 years ago, even worse. 100 years, 1,000 years. This is progress. Humanity is continuing to make moral progress and scientific progress, intellectual progress. So if that is their understanding of history and humanity, then when a Muslim comes and says, oh, actually, we are studying a book, and this has happened, in college. Or I remember when I was in graduate school, I had a book of fiqh, and it was about actually Islamic finance. And I had that book, and I was in another class, a philosophy class, and then one of the graduate students, he was a guy covered in tattoos and a nose ring, and he was studying philosophy. And then you think that these people are supposed to be very tolerant, very left-wing progressive, and he said, "Oh, what's that? Islamic finance? Oh, you mean terrorist finance?" And this was about 15 years ago. So this is their mindset. Like, this book about Islamic finance, it contains knowledge from 1,000 years ago. It contains knowledge that was written 1,000 years ago or 1,200 years ago, or you're reading Quran and you're reading Hadith. This is from 1,400 years ago, and you're implementing it in your life? Are you crazy? Are you backwards? Why? Who cares what they said 1,000 years ago? How can something written 1,000 years ago guide you in how you want to live your life? This is outrageous. This is the progressive mindset. This is progressivism. This is modernism. So this is why many, unfortunately, Muslims will have an inferiority complex. They will feel shy about their traditions. Their traditions are something that are from the past. When we read Quran, this is a tradition. Why? Because the Quran is from the past. It's from the revelation to the Prophet ﷺ in the past. But the modernist mindset says, no, you have to get rid of anything in the past. That's only going to hold you back. It's going to constrain and limit your options. You cannot live free if you are following the Quran, if you're following some past tradition or past culture. This is the nature of modernism. It's about constant change, constantly updating, constantly progressing. Their idea of progress. Of course, we know that this is not progress. But do you see the conflict? Do you see it's not a coincidence? Look at who are the people who are the most anti-Muslim today. You find them in the West. Look at what the United States has done in just the past 20 years. The United States, the European Union, the UK, in the past 20 years, they have formed a coalition in order to invade Muslim countries, to bomb Muslim countries, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, and on and on. And what is the main justification that they use for these attacks? They say that the Muslims need to modernize. The Muslims don't respect human rights. The Muslims are not adopting these human rights, these modern human rights, women's rights, LGBT rights. So they're not adopting democracy, modern democratic representationalism. So we have to enlighten them. We have to teach them the value of progress. We're doing them a favor. We're doing the Muslims a favor by teaching them what progress means. They're stuck in the Dark Ages. They're stuck in medieval times. And this harms women. It harms children. And then they show images of crying women and say, oh, look at the poor women in Afghanistan. Oh, we have to go liberate them. We have to teach them the value of, a women's studies education, for example. So that those invasions are justified on the basis of not Christianity, not atheism, but on the basis of modernism. Look at the war on terror, another major attack against Muslims. So we looked at what's happening in some of these Muslim countries. Look at what's happening in the West. Look at what's happening in China against the Uyghurs. Look at what the Burmese did to the Rohingya. Look at the policies against Kashmir, for example. These policies, many of them are justified on the basis of countering extremism. You're an extremist. We have to prevent extremist ideas because extremism leads to violence. It leads to abuse. So they put into place these policies to restrict what Muslims can teach. If you teach certain verses of the Quran or certain hadith, you're an extremist. We have to monitor you. We have to prevent you from traveling. We have to, in some cases, we have to take your kids, as has happened in Sweden. The Swedish social services will actually take Muslim kids because they say, oh, these parents are extremists. They are teaching their kids to be chaste and modest and not engage in zina. This is all extremism. So these are policies that are put in place on the basis of what ideology? Modernism. Modernism. Look at the attack on the Muslim family. Look at the attack on family in general. The idea that you can have a man and a woman in a marriage and there are very specific gender roles and the man is the head of the household, as we know in Islam, الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ, that men are the authorities over women, as we read in the Quran. You can't practice this. You can't implement this in your family or in your life. Why? Because this is not modern. This is an old tradition. This is a backwards cultural tradition. It has no relevance to the modern world. In the modern world, there is equality between the genders. Man and woman are equal partners. And maybe we don't have man and woman, maybe we have man and man. Maybe we have woman and woman. Maybe we have 3 or 4 polyamorous individuals in one marriage or relationship. Maybe that's the best way. We have to be open-minded. We have to constantly question and evolve and adapt. This is how they attack the traditional marriage. What about the traditional family structure? The traditional family structure of having a father and a mother who get married at a young age and they have children and the mother takes care of those children. She is the caretaker, the homemaker. These traditional roles that form the kinds of families that we see throughout human history, not just in Muslim societies, but in every society. Every society has this patriarchal structure in one form or another. And this is all attacked as, this is backwards, these are old traditions, this is cultural. We have to adapt, we have to update. You have to be willing to allow your wife to work and to be a strong, independent woman. Maybe she's the boss of you. Maybe you need to submit to your wife. And why should she have children? And why should she take care of children? Why don't you take care of the children? Or why don't you put your children into some nursery? Or why don't you allow the state to take care of your children and raise your children? You have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to change and adapt. Don't be closed-minded. Don't think that there's one way to do things just because a book from 1400 years ago tells you that. This is an attack on family. What is the ideology that's attacking the family? It's not Christianity. It's not Zionism. It's not Hindutva. It's modernism. Look at the historical attack on the Muslim lands. Has everyone here heard of colonialism? The colonial powers were the European powers. So colonialism has a long history. There was Christian colonialism, for example, European colonialism. But the modern colonialism that we see was on the basis of this ideology of modernism. They said that we have to modernize the world, and they called this the white man's burden. The white man's burden. The white man in Europe has the burden to civilize the savages in North America, the savages in Australia, the savages in Africa, the savages and the barbarians. And they had a distinction actually between the savage and the barbarian. Muslims were considered barbarians because we had agricultural societies, agrarian societies. Savages were more the tribal societies that they were more nomadic. They called savages. So this is part of their anthropology. Difference between a savage and a barbarian. So we have to, as white men, we have science, we have reason. We now recognize that religion is a myth. Religion is a myth used to control people and to subjugate them. So we have to liberate all of these people using our modern philosophies, our modern ideologies. We have to take over those lands. We have to institute and establish schools, modern schools, so we can take those barbarians and turn them into civilized men. This was their project. And they did this through colonialism. They would go and they would conquer specific territories and subjugate the people under brutal regimes. And their entire goal was to civilize those people. Of course, they would extract resources. They would take resources. And anyone who resisted their rule, they would just kill. They would kill. So millions of Muslims were killed in Algeria because of French colonialism. Millions of Muslims in the subcontinent were killed by the British. Millions of Muslims in Southeast Asia were killed by the Dutch. Many Muslims in Egypt were killed because of the British. This is the colonial project. And they would justify, they would say that, look, the ends justify the means. It's necessary sometimes to kill 1 million people so that the other million will fall into line. That is a price that we're willing to pay. So this kind of mentality that it doesn't matter if you kill millions of these barbarians, it's a price willing to pay, that's reflected even in the modern wars, even in the current contemporary wars. And it's the famous statement of the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, under the Clinton regime in the United States in the 1990s. And at that time, the US had put sanctions on Iraq, brutal sanctions on the country of Iraq. And they wanted to pressure Saddam to fall into line with the Zionist agenda. And they interviewed the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, and they said that about 500,000 Iraqi children have died because of lack of supplies, lack of medicine, due to these US sanctions. Do you think it's worth it? And Madeleine Albright said, yeah, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth 500,000 Iraqi children to die. For the purpose of what? For the purpose of modernization. Western modernization, Western aligning the Muslim world with the Western way of life, Western interests. So this is their logic. So what is this ideology? It's modernism. This is the dominant ideology of today. And also with Zionism. Zionism is a modernist movement. Traditional Judaism doesn't have all of this kind of secular nationalist ideology that is Zionism. And you have, even in London, there are these Jews that you might have seen them recently protest. They say, we completely reject the Zionist state. The Zionist state and Zionism is something that destroys traditional Judaism. We are getting away from traditional Judaism because of this Zionist state. It's a nationalist, ethno-nationalist movement, and that's not correct according to Judaism. Hinduism, the same thing. Hindutva and the BJP within India is also a secular nationalist movement based on ethnicity. Based on ethnicity. So these are all secular modernist movements that are attacking Islam. And what are the Zionists saying in their attack against Islam? They have entire media strategies. The Zionists have entire media strategies to demonize Muslims, to demonize Palestinians. They say, well, we're justified in bombing these Palestinians. Why? Because these Palestinians are barbaric. They are uncivilized. They oppress their women. They oppress their children. They only care about war. They only care about genocide. This is the justification that they use for their crimes. Hindutva, the same thing. They accuse Muslims, oh, you guys have triple talaq. Oh, Muslims are oppressing their women. They practice polygyny. Muslims are oppressive in this way and that way. All of their arguments are these modernist arguments. Modernist arguments against Islam. So everywhere we look, everywhere that Muslims are being attacked, being oppressed, being critiqued, online, offline, every country that we see putting in policies in place to repress Muslims, whether it's in the West or it's in the East, in countries like China. China has the same arguments against the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs need to eat pork. The Uyghurs need to eat during Ramadan. The Uyghurs need to stop memorizing Quran. Why? Because this is going to, abiding by Islam is taking away from progress. Our national goals, our national progress is being impeded if people are religious, if people are abiding by their traditions. This is a modernist critique of the Uyghurs. So there's not a single conflict that we see, a major conflict in the world where Muslims are oppressed, and it's not modernism that is the oppressor. So we have to recognize that this is the ideology that needs to be critiqued. This is the ideology that needs to be debunked. So how do we do that? How do we critique modernism? How do we undermine it and show that it is incorrect? There are many ways to do this, but just for the sake of time, the main point that we can make and that we should make is that look at where modernism is leading humanity. By every metric that we see, every metric of quality of life and human satisfaction, the statistics show humanity is on a downward spiral. Rates of depression have been skyrocketing in all of the most developed nations. The use of prescription antidepressants has been skyrocketing in all of these Western developed nations. The level of suicide has skyrocketed, especially in the past 2 years. People are killing themselves. Look at the state of society. Look at the level of violence and conflict within many of the, especially post-COVID. There are protests, there are riots, in the United States, for example, many cities are lawless because the crime rate is so high and there's no police that can stop the crime. This is the result of modernism. These are the fruits of modernism. And it's very clear to see why. Children, for example, that are institutionalized and they're put into state schools, they do not learn very basic human values. The schools, in the first place, were designed just to turn children into obedient citizens, to work in factories or to work in corporations. That's what the whole public education system is about. But even that has been reduced to babysitting. Children are in these institutions, they're not learning basic human values. Those children become adults who can't really make connections with other human beings. They don't have any intention to get married, to have children, because they don't know what that even means. They don't even know what marriage even means. They're like animals. They're just committing zina with each other. Having children out of wedlock, which perpetuates the system of children who are just put into a broken system. Many of these youth, it's quite shocking, don't even understand that you shouldn't harm others. You shouldn't steal. They don't understand these basic things that we take for granted, because those are the kinds of values that you learn because of a strong family, stable families, a stable culture, a culture that teaches these values. But that culture has been destroyed by technology like smartphones, children addicted to social media. And social media, the algorithms promote the most degenerate content. So when you're on TikTok or you're on Instagram or you're on Facebook, the algorithm that comes into your news feed is bringing the most degenerate videos, images into your feed, and the kids are just scrolling. And it provides a dopamine addiction. A dopamine addiction that these kids are destroyed psychologically because of the smartphone. So this is the state of societies. It continues to degenerate. The crime rate is increasing. Depression is increasing. Family, you don't even have a concept of family. By the year 2030, over 50% of people will not be married and will have no hope of ever getting married. The institution of marriage is becoming extinct. If marriage becomes extinct, then you have no concept of a stable family. If you survey women, 25% of women do not even want to have children. They view having a child as a burden. So the human race is going to slowly go extinct. The more people adopt this modernist mindset, this modernist psychology, this modernist way of life, the more that humanity will suffer and is suffering. So this makes an easy opportunity for us as Muslims to do da'wah and to provide an alternative. Islam is the only system that has refused to modernize, the only religion and the only way of life that has refused to modernize its books, its practices, its way of life. And this is why we're the subject of the most attack. We're the last man standing. And they can't allow that to happen, so they pressurize. The Zionists will attack, the Hindutva will attack, the Christians will attack, the atheist will attack, the Buddhists even will attack. All of these different groups attack Islam. Why? Because we refuse to modernize. We refuse to give up our way of life and our deen. That makes us public enemy number one. But this also means we provide the true alternative to this modernist malaise, to this modernist demise. We're providing the true alternative. So we have to be firm. And as the Imam said, we have to have istiqamah. We have to stay the course and believe and have tawakkul that Allah will give us the tawfiq, Allah will give us the victory against these pressures and these enemies. So the people who are going to sell out, compromise Islam, say that, oh, well, we need to adapt and we need to change with the times, and oh, we need to fit in, we need to assimilate. These are not only the biggest enemies of the Muslims, they're also the biggest enemies of non-Muslims. Non-Muslims need to have us as an example. We have to give them the message, convey the message of Islam. How can we do that if we're going to change in order to satisfy the kufr system of modernism that exists? So we have the duty to stand strong and to resist these types of attacks and these kinds of efforts.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, as-salatu was-salam ala rasulillah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullahu khairan, everyone who has attended this event, and jazakallahu khaira, our brother Muhammad Hijab, with that rousing speech, mashallah. And appreciation to all the organizers and brothers for putting on this very important and beautiful event. An event that some are not happy that it's taking place. There was an attempt to shut it down. There was an attempt to prevent you all from hearing about this very important topic of family and feminism and liberalism. This is a topic that it is destroying souls, it is destroying families, it is destroying parts of the ummah. And in the West, we are most at risk because we are exposed to the brunt, the force of this liberal feminist system. We are exposed to the force of it, but even around the world, they are pushing this ideology of feminism. Even in Palestine, before they were bombing, before they were committing this ethnic cleansing, killing our brothers and sisters in Palestine, they were introducing feminist measures, legislation. They called it CEDAW from the United Nations. This idea that Muslims are backwards, Muslims are misogynists, Muslims hate women. The laws of Islam, the Sharia of Allah is unjust. This is what they believe in the UN, in the United Nations. This is what the world powers believe. And their mission is to make you abandon that Sharia, to abandon that law, to abandon the Quran. The Quran is a misogynistic book according to them. The Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is misogyny and hatred of women. They want you to abandon it. So they're not going to come to you and me and say that, well, you need to become an atheist, you need to become an agnostic. They say, oh, keep your religion, keep Islam, but you need to reform it, change it, update it, bring it to the times. We're in the 21st century. Why are you trying to live as if you're in the 7th century? This is the reform project. And the significance of this is that the deen of Islam has been preserved for 1400 years. How is it preserved? It is preserved by pushing off and rejecting the pressure, political pressure, social pressure. And now we're at the peak of pressure coming from kuffar, coming from disbelievers to change, from the world powers, the United Nations, the United States, to change. The only way to preserve our deen so that our children are able to be Muslim and believers, that our grandchildren are able to be Muslim and believers, our great-grandchildren, in 100 years, will there be Islam? Can we take it for granted and just assume that we're going to have Islam anywhere in the world in 100 years? How can we assume that? If Muslims adopt these feminist ideals, these feminist measures, there's not going to be Islam. There's not going to be Islam that our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren can practice. We might have them alive and well, but without Iman, without the Quran, without the implementation of deen. That is the reality if we do not act, if we do not fight to preserve our deen from these pressures. And this is a beautiful moment, a critical moment, because this is the first type of conference where Muslim speakers are coming to talk about this issue very clearly against feminism. Where else does this happen? This is a critical, crucial moment when you have mainstream figures of da'wah in the UK coming together for this type of event, specifically to speak about this topic of what are the rights of men? What are the rights of husbands? Is this a topic that we can talk about? Is this a topic that we can teach about and discuss? When was the last time you heard a khutbah or a speech on the rights of women in Islam? Was it last week, within a month? Raise your hand. We hear in the United States, we hear a khutbah on this topic at least once a month about the rights of women, the rights of wives, which is fine. That's to know about the rights of each gender is important. But when was the last time you heard a khutbah or a speech on the rights of husbands? In the last year, in the last decade, have you heard such a talk? Why? Why is it not spoken about? Why is it not discussed? Why are the shuyukh and the imams pressured not to speak about this topic? Why can this event be attacked and there be an attempt to cancel this event? Whereas if we were just talking about women's rights and we're talking about how amazing women are, you think anyone would try to cancel? No, we would probably get promoted. There might be even government support for that kind of talk. But as soon as you want to talk about the rights of men, others, the rights of husbands, no, shut it down. Why do you think that is? And this is a very important strategy that we have to recognize. It's a strategy that was used by the colonial powers, a strategy to destroy Islam. Because men, we have a certain nature. Our nature is that we want to care for women. We want to cherish women, protect women. That's a natural instinct that we have. They take advantage of that. They say that if we want to reform Islam, the way to do it is to go specifically through this path of women's issues, women's rights. We need to promote this idea that Islam is subjecting women, subjugating women, oppressing women. Muslim men are misogynists. Muslim men are not doing enough for women. They need to do more. This is the idea that they spread, and they have been spreading it for over 200 years. Through colonialism. This idea was a explicit part of the colonial project. And that policy has continued to this day. And there was a big controversy because there was a memo in the White House in Washington, D.C., where in Donald Trump's administration, the State Department had written a memo about how we can liberalize the Muslim world. That was the question. And they said the number one way that we can liberalize the Muslim world is what? We have to promote women, women's issues, women's leadership, women's rights. This is the foot in the door that we need to be able to completely liberalize and secularize the Muslim. So that the Muslim says, yeah, I believe in Allah, I believe in the Quran, but I really don't think we should implement these things in life. We should just have a secular system and feminist laws and liberal secular laws, and that's how we want to live. Belief is a private thing in your heart. Belief, iman is private in your heart. We don't need to practice it. We just want to be good citizens. This is what they want to turn all of us into. Good, obedient, liberal, secular citizens. And you believe, okay, privately believe in your house, or not even in your house. We can't establish a khilafah. We cannot establish an Islamic nation. You cannot even establish an Islamic household. You can't even establish Islam in your living room. You can't establish Islam in your bedroom. You cannot. Because the laws of liberalism are so invasive that even in the privacy of your bedroom you cannot practice Islam. Because they have laws, feminist laws, that dictate how you can be a husband, how the rights that are owed to your wife, regardless of what you believe, regardless of what you think. It doesn't matter. The law says that no. You can't, for example, tell your wife that, well, you're not allowed to leave the house at night. You're not allowed to leave the house without my permission. It's not allowed. You can't. This is controlling behavior, and it counts as domestic abuse. You're not allowed to tell your wife that she can't go and meet with these people. You can't tell her that. That's controlling behavior. That's abusive behavior. You can't tell your wife that, okay, this is my money, my bank account that I've had since I was a teenager, and I've had this account for 10 years, 20 years. You can't have access to my money. The government says, no, that's abuse. This is financial abuse. Your money is her money. Your money is her money. If you restrict her access to your accounts and to your funds, this is a form of abuse. This is controlling behavior. It is abusive. And you will be penalized for it. If you ever, may Allah protect all of us, if your wife takes you to divorce court or to family court, she will cite the fact that, oh, he had money that he hid from me. And the judge will say, okay, this is abuse. This is controlling behavior. He's going to be more likely, the judge, he or she is going to be more likely to give the custody of the children to the mother. So that means that you cannot implement the basic teachings, values of Islam, even within your own bedroom. So look at the amount of injustice. But do you feel the injustice? Are you aware of this? Are you aware the oppressive nature of this liberal secular system? That it has the audacity to come into your own living room, into your own bedroom, to tell you how you can have a wife, if you can have a wife, how you can talk to your wife, how you can treat your wife, and how she can treat you? Do you not feel that oppression? If you do, alhamdulillah. If you don't, then you're living in a state of ghafla. You're living in a state of delusion. and you're not aware of the quicksand that you are being sucked into slowly, 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 until it's too late, until the sand is to your neck, to your mouth, to your nose, and then what happens? Another statistic, another sad story. This is the reality of feminism. So that the way to secularize Muslims, the way to liberalize them, to turn them one step closer to atheism, is through women's issues. Get Muslims to become embarrassed and ashamed of their Quran, of their Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there are many things that can be mentioned, but one significant issue that I wanted to talk about. Does Islam encourage women's leadership? Who says yes? Don't be afraid. Who says no? Okay, alhamdulillah, so 90%. Where in Islam does it say that women should be leaders? Women should be at the front. Every masjid needs to have a woman on the board. Every community, institution, or organization must have a woman representative. Where do we see this in Islam? Where do we see this in the Quran and the Sunnah? Where in the Quran and the Sunnah does it say that women should be the leaders of their household, of their families? Where does it say this? The issue of women's leadership is one of the main issues that are used to attack Muslims and to shame them into reforming, into changing. And I know this because I'm coming from the United States. And maybe you haven't seen these specific efforts as of yet in every single masjid, but you see the media. Even in the Guardian, even in the BBC, they are shaming Muslims. They're saying, look, these masajid, they do not accommodate women. These masajid do not have enough space for women. These masajid do not have women's leadership. Why? We demand change. And then you have these munafiqeen and munafiqat who are pushing for reform in the masjid, specifically on this issue. This is their way to get their foot in the door. Because once you compromise on this issue, then why not compromise on any other issue? Compromise on LGBT. Compromise on gender as a whole. Compromise on every aspect of Islam. Why not? You compromised on this issue. So this is their strategy, to get us to budge. We have to stand firm on this issue of women's leadership. Nowhere in Islam do we have this concept. Islam says, "Al-rijalu qawwamuna 'ala an-nisa." Men are the authorities over women in Surah An-Nisa. This is so clear cut. Once you start introducing women as leaders, but the idea, this is the problem that people have. Well, what is the justification? Don't women have intelligence? Don't women have skills and capabilities? Why can't we have women's leadership? What is the wisdom of that? This is a legitimate question that some of the sisters have, and maybe some of the brothers have too. Why? Why should there only be men as leaders? Well, this is what Allah has established. This is how Allah has created us. Men to be leaders and women to be followers. The Prophet ﷺ says in the Quran, "Kullukum ra'in." All of you, every one of you is a shepherd. And every shepherd is responsible for his flock. And the man is the shepherd of his family. Clear cut. The man is the shepherd. He's the leader. Why? Why? This goes to the nature of men and women. What is the difference between men and women? Men have this character, because when we talk about masculinity, one of the defining characteristics of masculinity, what is exclusive to men, is leadership. Men are leaders, women are not leaders. So when we talk about masculinity, you have to have that component of leadership. Men have a different nature, men have a different sentiment than women. When men are leaders, their minds work in a way to consider the benefits of all. How can we make sure that everyone is given according to what is just? That is the mentality of men. Are there corrupt men? Yes, there can be corrupt men. But the default inclination or fitrah of men is, how can we make sure everything is just? Women do not have exactly this type of mentality. That doesn't mean that women are unjust. But this is not as natural to them. The way that Allah has created women is to want to extract resources. How can I get more for myself and my children? How can I secure the most for myself and my children? Because I need to preserve myself and I need to protect my children. This is the fitrah, the nature that Allah has given women. And it is a beautiful nature. It is a beautiful nature, well suited for motherhood, well suited for being mothers, well suited for being caretakers of the home. That is why Allah has given them that nature. But men do not have exactly that nature. Men have a nature where they think about, he doesn't just think about himself. He thinks about sacrificing his own needs, his own desires for his family. He'll die for his wife. He'll die for his children. That is the nature of a man. And we can see this. You're walking down the streets of Birmingham. It's safe to walk in the streets at night, I guess, in Birmingham. So you're walking down the street and someone with a knife jumps out and you're walking with your wife. Is it in the nature of the wife to jump in front of her husband and hold him behind her? No. The husband is the one that shields his wife. If that knife is going to stab, it's going to stab him first. That is the nature of a husband, as opposed to the nature of the wife. So, given that nature, the man should be the leader. The man needs to be the leader. In the family, in the marriage, in the community, in the ummah. If women want to be leaders, here's a question for them. You're sleeping at night in your apartment or your house, and downstairs you hear in the middle of the night some glass breaking. A window shatters. If women want to be the leaders, then maybe, are you going to be willing to go and check what broke the glass? Are you going to go downstairs and check if there's a murderer or a robber or a burglar that has broken in? Or are you going to have Habibi? Is Habibi going to go, or are you going to go? If it's going to be Habibi or Habibik, then he's the leader. He's the leader. So don't push for leadership. That is not what you actually want. And this is the nature of the kind of fitna that sisters are dealing with. Because when it comes to certain types of desires that sisters have, women in general women desire to show themselves. Women desire to beautify themselves to attract attention. This is a base desire, but it is part of the natural desire of women. Just like it is in the natural desire of men to look at women, to look at the aura or the beauty of women. That's the desire, but they control the desire. Similarly, women have a base desire to show their beauty, to attract attention. That is their natural desire. This desire for leadership is completely unnatural. The women that go on stages and they go in front of these protests and they hold a megaphone and they shout and they act like men, this is completely unnatural. This is not natural to women. This is something that has been implanted. This is something that has been placed in their minds from outside. They have been told, this is what you should be like. This is what you should want. And unfortunately, some of the sisters, some of the Muslim women in the world today, they have accepted this. And they've internalized this. And this has created shubuhat, doubts about Islam. And that's only the beginning. Doubts about Islam. It has created monsters in the marriage where your wife is constantly trying to compete with you for power. She has to be the equal partner, if not the leader herself. So instead of a marriage full of sakina, a marriage full of mawadda, love, mercy, it becomes a marriage of competition, fighting, disagreement, bitterness. This is because you have not accepted the gender roles in Islam. You have not accepted the role that Allah has given to you as a follower. You are the follower, your husband is the leader. You have not accepted your place. And do you think that Allah is not going to reward you for accepting your place? He will. In fact, by being a follower, you have this opportunity for Jannah. Through this obedience to your husband, through being a wonderful, beautiful, obedient wife. This is what is your means to Jannah. But women now, because of feminism, are rejecting this. They're rejecting Islam that is saying, obey your husband. This is a disaster. What does this mean for children who are in these families that the parents are fighting, bickering because of feminist misunderstandings? And then the parents get divorced, and then the mother is empowered by this unjust court system that is going to give her the children, even if she was the oppressor, even if she was the unjust. But because of this feminist system, she just says that, oh, he abused me, he controlled me. He was a misogynistic Muslim man. Therefore, the judge grants her the children, grants her his property. This is dhulm, this is the path to the fire. It's destroying Islam for the next generation and the next generation after that. What kind of progress is this? What kind of civilization is this? What kind of life is this that some Muslims are desperately trying to copy and imitate the kuffar, even unto the lizard hole, even unto such a ridiculous, broken, corrupt system? We are trying to imitate that and practice that. This is nonsense. This is ridiculous. This is the path to the fire. So may Allah protect us from these delusions. May Allah protect our communities from this trap of women's leadership. When the Prophet ﷺ says that no people will succeed who put women in charge of their affairs, do we truly believe in the Prophet ﷺ? If we truly believe in him, then why do we not accept his teaching? Why do we try to find ways to minimize his teachings? This is bid'ah. This is the pinnacle of innovation that leads to the fire. So may Allah protect us. May Allah empower us to preserve our deen. May Allah give victory to our brothers in Palestine. Destroy their oppressors. May Allah protect us all. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
فالصالحات قانتات حافظات للغيب بما حفظ الله واللاتي تخافون نشوزهن فعظوهن واهجروهن في المضاجع واضربوهن فإن أطعنكم فلا تبغوا عليهن سبيلا إن الله كان عليا كبيرا.
إن المسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والقانتين والقانتين والقانتات والصادقين والصادقات والصابرين والصابرات والخاشعين والخاشعات والمتصدقين والمتصدقات والصائمين والصائمات والحافظين فروجهم والحافظات والذاكرين الله كثيرا والذاكرات أعد الله لهم